The year is 1807. John Coulter, a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition, was the first white man to have laid his eyes upon Yellowstone. In astonishment and disbelief of such an otherworldly landscape, he described this region as a volcanic tract with its gloomy terrors, its hidden fires, its smoking pits, noxious steams, and the all-pervading smell of brimstone. In this video, I will prove to you that the true Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the plain are actually in Yellowstone National Park. Genesis 10 and 19 describes the border of the land of Canaan, and the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon. Sidon, as we know, is Zidon, which is along the sea. So that's the extreme west border of the Canaanites. As thou comest to Gerar unto Gaza. Gerar and Gaza is in the land of the Philistines, also the furthest west along the south territory of the land of Canaan. As thou goest unto Sodom and Gomorrah and Adma and Zeboim, even unto Lasha. As we know through other scriptures, these cities are towards the east of the Holy Land, which shows that these cities are the cities of the extremities of the land of Canaan, meaning it should be at the furthest edge of the Holy Land. The book of Genesis, chapter 13 and verse 3. And he went on his journeys from the south even to Bethel, and the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai, unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And Abram called upon the name of Yahuwah, and Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for the substance was great, so that they cannot dwell together. And that makes sense because Abram had 318 male servants, and who knows how many female servants, and Lot also had many servants as well. So this was a group of people well over 700 in total, and they each had their own tents, and they also had cattle. So it makes sense why they would not fit in this small valley near Yost, Utah. Genesis 13 and 7. And there was strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and Perizzite dwelled in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before Yahuwah destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of Yahuwah, like the land of Mizraim, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. Now, this is something we must understand about this excerpt in the book of Genesis. It's kind of out of order. Let me explain. When Abram gave the idea about him and Lot separating themselves from each other, the first thing that it says is Lot lifted up his eyes and seen all the plain of Jordan. And then it said he journeyed east after that, when in all actuality, he journeyed east first and then discovered the plain of Jordan. Because the plain of Jordan is nowhere near Bethel, he can't just see the plain of Jordan from Bethel. He would have had to migrate east. And then once he migrated east, he looked up and seen all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered. Also, in the Middle East, Lot would not have to travel east in order to get to the Sodom and Gomorrah region, which was in the Metzada area, south of the Dead Sea. Plain of Jordan doesn't mean the flat land of Jordan. As we know, a plain is a flat land. However, this is not saying the flat land of Jordan. Even though the Jordan River of Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming does indeed have flat land surrounding it, it's not talking about flat land. If we look at the Hebrew text, plain in Hebrew, in reference to the cities of the plain, is kikar. Kikar means circle, from the root karar, which means whirling or dancing. This indicates movement. So some type of moving circle surrounds the River Jordan. So it has nothing to do with the smoothness of the land, but perhaps rather the hundreds of circular springs from the Bear River all the way up into Yellowstone National Park. Along the Bear River, there's already a ton of springs, like the Soda Springs, for example, which are very numerous, and this is at the very tip of the Bear River, also known as the Jordan River. But that's just a few of the literal thousands of springs all along the Jordan River, going all the way northeast into Wyoming. The Bear River is actually partially fed by the same source as the Snake River, which goes into the Yellowstone region. Lot initially traveled east to the Jordan River Valley and then migrated north along the river until he settled in Sodom. We know this because migrating from Bethel to the Jordan River will take you to the southward section of the Jordan River. But if he chose himself all the cities of the Kikar, that means he would have nomadically migrated and pitched his tent in all the areas along all the springs of the Jordan River, meaning from the south to the north of the Jordan River. And he would have continued along the Jordan River until he accidentally discovered the Snake River, which is very close to the Jordan River, also in this same general location as all the hot springs, the Kikar of the land. He would have continued to migrate north until he came upon an area with the most springs, now known as Yellowstone National Park, the most watered and fertile place in the whole region of Canaan at the time, and therefore he pitched his tent and settled in that area and never migrated out until Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. But it said all that land was very watered before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So why does it say before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? The word for well watered is mashkeh, which means that the water was good specifically to drink. After the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the water in that region would no longer be suitable to drink. It's far too acidic. It has lots of sulfur dioxide. So the water in this area would taste horrible to drink. And depending on which spring you're drinking from, it could possibly even kill you. So therefore, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, a lot of the water is no longer mashkeh. It's no longer good to drink.
So this is the journey of Lot. He would have started in Bethel. He would have took a highway that once passed through Yost into the ancient city of Shechem. From thence he migrated east. He continued to go east until he reached the Kakar, the circles, the whirling circles of Jordan, the springs of Jordan. And he found this land very, very good.
Now, how exactly do I know that this is the ancient location of Bethel? Well, first of all, Bethel is a city in the land of Ephraim, north of both the tribal territories of Benjamin and Judah. Benjamin borders the Salt Sea, and Judah borders the Salt Sea. So Bethel should be north of the Salt Sea. Bethel is along a mountain, a large mountain called Mount Ephraim, and it is west of another mountain called Mount Bethel. So it has to be wedged in between two mountains, one being Mount Ephraim and the other being Mount Bethel. The mountain in the middle of Bethel and Ai is where Abram pitched his tent at one point, climbed, and even built an altar. Bethel is not only the place where Abraham built an altar, but also the same place where Jacob built a pillar. If we look on this mountain called Mount Bethel, at the very top near the high point, we can see both the pillar and possibly the altar. Right here stands the pillar. Upon the top of the Bali Mountains. Now Jacob made several metseba, or pillars of stone, which were these heaps of stone set up for a memorial for all generations. One of the flat stones at the base is what Jacob would have slept on. The other stones are used to make the pillar erect. Pillars like this can be found all throughout the Holy Land. In fact, I've seen one at the base of Mount Sinai on my first expedition. Genesis 28:16. And Jacob awaked out of his sleep and said, "Surely Yahuwah is in this place, and I knew not." And he was afraid and said, "How dreadful is this place! This is none other but the house of Elohim, and this is the gate of heaven." And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had for his pillows and set it up. The Hebrew word for set it up is seem or sum, which means to heap up, to heap up. And he set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was called Luz at first. And then directly north of Jacob's pillar, there's this object which is reminiscent of the same altar at the base of Mount Sinai. If we were to look at that from Google Maps, it's rectangular, it sticks up out of the ground, it casts a shadow. I can't really get a more clear image of it than this. You know what I'm saying? It's 4 feet wide and 9 feet long. So it's more on the smaller side wherever this object is. I really would like to go there so I can see this for myself. But this is possibly an altar, guys. Possibly an altar. But we know for a fact that Jacob's pillar is on top of this mountain.
So what was Sodom's sin? Genesis 19:4. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, Where are the men which came to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And know means sexual intercourse. And when you continue to read further on, you'll see that these men actually attempted to grape the men who walked into the house. So the sins of Sodom was homosexuality and rape. But the book of Jasher, chapter 18, gives more detail. Jasher 18, verse 11. In those days, all the people of Sodom and Gomorrah and of the whole 5 cities were exceedingly wicked and sinful against Yahuwah. And they provoked Yahuwah with their abominations. And they strengthened in aging abominably and scornfully before Yahuwah. And their wickedness and crimes were in those days great before Yahuwah. And they had in their land a very extensive valley, about a half a day's walk. And in it there were fountains of water, and a great deal of herbage surrounding the water. And the people of Sodom and Gomorrah went there 4 times in the year, with their wives and children, and all belonging to them. And they rejoiced there with timbrels and dances. And in the time of rejoicing, they would all rise and lay hold on their neighbors' wives, and some, the virgin daughters of their neighbors, and they enjoyed them. And each man saw his wife and daughter in the hands of his neighbor, and did not say a word. And they did so from the morning to night. And they afterwards returned home, each man to his house, and each woman to her tent. So they always did 4 times in a year. So not only was their sin homosexuality, rape, it was also adultery, and perhaps even pedophilia. And the men would see their wives and their daughters getting clapped, and they didn't even care. And that was Yah's problem that he had with these cities. Sexual immorality in every form. So how did the 5 cities get destroyed anyway? In Genesis 19 and 24, it states, Then Yahuwah rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Yahuwah out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. And Abraham got up early in the morning to go to the place where he stood before Yahuwah. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. So the first thing we must take note of is the fact that it states that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed with brimstone out of heaven. Now, the first thing we must understand is brimstone is purely volcanic. It comes from under the earth, not from heaven. So how does something from earth fall from the sky? The only way that can happen is volcanic eruption. The technical name for brimstone is sulfur, and sulfur comes from the inner walls of volcanic vents. So when Abraham looked toward the plain, or toward the Kikar, the land of springs, he seen an entire pillar of smoke in the distance rising up as a furnace. This is what a volcanic eruption looks like. And for Abraham to have seen it from that distance shows that this smoke not only existed where Sodom and Gomorrah was, but it blanketed the sky and spread out so far that Abraham could have seen it from a distance, which also insinuates a volcanic eruption.
Part of it that has worked its way down.
In actuality, this is what geologists refer to as a slump, and it occurs when bits of talus, in this case flakes of sediment, crumble off due to erosion and fall to the base of the cliff, just like at this location in Isfjord, Svalbard, Norway. Ron thought that this was a city because these walls look man-made.
Looking down the city streets, one can notice man-made shapes which are not found in nature. Here we see a building with square sides or 90-degree angles.
But there are a lot of natural formations that look man-made even when they're not, like this basalt rock formation in Penghu, Taiwan. An archaeologist would set up a dig and look for actual signs of habitation, not just rely on pareidolia. Sure, it appears like there are streets winding through the city, and modern trails wind between these mounds, but take a look from a satellite, and you'll quickly realize you're looking at dried up riverbeds. And in case this desert is too bright to see clearly on Google Maps, I tracked down the exact spot Ron selected to show in his video. He said these cities are by the Dead Sea, and he's looking out from the top of Masada.
One of the things that becomes apparent when one looks at this, say for example, from the top of Masada, is the wall system.
Masada has a famous Roman era fort and lookout point right here, which would mean Ron is looking out this way. And blammo! I found the exact spot. What about these swirling patterns in the walls?
This is evidence of extreme heat, up to 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, where thermal ionization occurs.
The Bible describes a sustained burn. At 6,000 Fahrenheit, you wouldn't get a neat swirling pattern in the walls because there wouldn't be a single wall left standing. At half that temperature, the entire city would melt into a puddle. And at 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, all traces of the city would boil away. So what did cause these swirling patterns then? This type of swirling pattern isn't remotely unique to the Dead Sea. For example, if you travel about 1,000 miles northeast, you'll find yourself in Khiza, Azerbaijan at the Candy Cane Mountains. And you can see the layers vividly here because the layers of iron have oxidized and turned red, allowing you to see naturally occurring swirling patterns very similar to what Wyatt is falsely attributing to fire. Sorry, Ron, these are called seismites. And if you want to read more about this, Tel Aviv University's School of Geoscience has done some fairly extensive research on the matter. Sulfur nodules, which Wyatt claimed rained down flaming from the sky, melting everything around them before being smothered in ash, these also aren't what they look like to the untrained eye. Sulfur deposits can be found all around the Dead Sea. Geologists examining the area found that these deposits were naturally occurring. These nodules resulted from bacterial sulfate from the evaporated Dead Sea, gradually reducing into elemental sulfur. But what about the burn marks surrounding these balls?
It has like a burned ring around it.
Balls of sulfur surrounded by hardened capsules of burnt sulfur.
Everything burned, and this sulfur continued to burn, and it vitrified the material around it.
Well, according to scientists, these aren't burn marks at all. They're concentrations of iron. And when the director of the Ron Wyatt Museum in Kentucky learned that this was iron, he changed the narrative to this.
You see, it has a shell around it, and that shell has a lot of iron content in it. And the sulfur inside of it vaporizes before the iron can melt. So how did that sulfur stay there while the iron was forming around it? Nobody can explain it. God did it.
Oh, you were so close! He literally just debunked himself. He realized that his hypothesis was balls of fire raining from the sky, which didn't match the evidence. And rather than going with the evidence, he dogmatically appealed to the miraculous God of the gaps. We don't know, therefore,
God did it.
Not only are these sulfur balls found in modern Israel, but they're also found in many other regions of the world. But the reason why they're found in modern Israel is specifically because when the African plate and the Arabian plate separated, forming what we call the Red Sea, it also broke modern Israel in half, causing the Dead Sea Jordan River Valley, which was once called Lake Lisan, one huge body of water. When that body of water dried up, a lot of sulfur was created due to the amounts of bacteria that were accumulating in the water. Also, it's strange that a lot of people don't realize that the melting point of sulfur is 235 degrees Fahrenheit, which is colder than your oven at default temperature. Meaning, if sulfur was raining down from the sky, in fire, it would be liquid. It would not be solid. And then once it dries, sulfur turns black. Once that sulfur solidifies again, it turns black, not white. You won't see any white balls of sulfur. You will see black residue. It wouldn't be balls. It would be residue because it would be liquid that hit it and then solidified. It would look like magma drips. When Moses spake to the children of Yasharal concerning what would happen to them and to their land if they decided to break the laws which Yahuwah gave them, he tells them that their land would be destroyed. And he said that the nations will see our land being destroyed, and this is how they would describe it. Deuteronomy 29:23. And that whole land thereof is brimstone and salt and burning. that it is not sown, nor beareth, nor any grass groweth therein, like the overthrowing of Sodom and Gomorrah, Adma and Zeboim, which Yahuwah overthrew in his anger and in his wrath. So Moses basically says that the entire Holy Land will be similar to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And in that description, he basically describes a land of brimstone and salt, smoke and steam, where no plants can grow. Yellowstone National Park actually produces smoke to this day. Not just steam, but actual smoke is coming up out of the earth. Hydrogen sulfide gas, carbon dioxide gas, and sulfuric acid gas forms a smoke coming up out of the earth of Yellowstone National Park till this day, along with water vapor from the springs. The entire area surrounding the wastelands of Yellowstone National Park is actually pretty green. There's lots of plants that grow there. There's even lots of fruit like berries, huckleberries, raspberries, and strawberries. But guess what? If you look at the hydrothermal areas of Yellowstone National Park, you will notice that there are so many dead trees. That's because not a single tree can possibly reach maturity in that area, because every single tree is slowly being poisoned by the acidity of the soil. In the mountains surrounding the wastelands, berries grow in abundance. But if a bird were to eat that berry and drop the seed on the wasteland of the springs and geysers, a little sprout will grow, but it won't ever reach maturity. It will quickly die because of the heat and because of the acidity of the soil. In the destroyed regions of Yellowstone National Park, no plant can grow to maturity and flourish. Everything dies and gets burnt up. These are the specific areas where the cities were. This is how King Solomon described the cities of the plain. Wisdom of Solomon chapter 10 verse 6. When the ungodly perished, she, wisdom, delivered the righteous man who fled from the fire, which fell down upon the 5 cities, of whose wickedness even to this day the wasteland that smoketh is a testimony. Even to this day the wasteland that smoketh is a testimony. Solomon says here that even to this day Sodom and Gomorrah smoketh. If we look at the Middle East, there's nothing producing any smoke in that region. There's only a few areas on earth that is constantly producing smoke from the ground. And the major region is Yellowstone National Park, which contains more hydrothermal activity than any other place on earth, of whose wickedness even to this day the wasteland that smoketh is a testimony, and plants bearing fruit that never come to ripeness, and plants bearing fruit that never come to ripeness. So Solomon does describe the presence of plants being in the region, but he says they never grow to maturity and the fruits can never reach ripeness. That tells you right there that the soil must be too acidic, too dangerous for any plant to thrive in. This sounds exactly like Yellowstone National Park in the wasteland areas. If we look in the place where they say is Sodom and Gomorrah in the Middle East, it's completely empty. There's no plants whatsoever. There has to be the presence of some plants in order for Solomon to say this. There's also no smoke there. And then it says, and a standing pillar of salt is a monument of an unbelieving soul. So Solomon says, even to that day, there was still a standing pillar of salt. Talking about Lot's wife when she was turned into a pillar of salt. It's still there, according to Solomon. A lot of people say that Lot's wife has been found in the Middle East, but this pillar is made out of sandstone. So how can that be Lot's wife? And we're going to talk about that later on when we talk about the pillars of salt that exists in Yellowstone National Park to this day. And we're going to point out exactly which one is Lot's wife. Now, did you know the names of the cities of the plain were actually named after they were already destroyed? We don't know the original name of Sodom, Gomorrah, Zeboim, Lasha, or Adma. These are all names applied to the land after it was already destroyed. For example, Sodom in Hebrew means burnt or scorched. It says that is volcanic or bituminous. The area in the Middle East that they say is Sodom is not burnt or scorched. Gomorrah means basically a heap. It comes from the root amar, which means to heap. Sodom is specifically the area of northern Yellowstone, a place called Mammoth Hot Springs. If we look at the land of Sodom, you can see a lot of this burnt landscape. Look at the trees that grow in this wasteland. As you can see, like I said, they never reach maturity because the soil is so hot and so acidic that they die. And when they die, they turn completely black and they scorch. Here's another example. And yet another example. You can also see all the sulfur deposits on the ground, that brimstone. And here's another example. This is the burnt land, also known as Sodom. Gomorrah is right on the outskirts of Sodom. As you can see, the mound, Orange Spring Mound, is really one big mound of travertine. Travertine, also known as calcium carbonate, is a type of salt that is produced heavily in Yellowstone, and these heaps of it can be found in the entire region surrounding the burnt land to the north. When we go further north of this region, the heaps get more apparent. Again, it comes from the root amora, which means heap. Thermal travertines are formed as a consequence of the precipitation of salts from the hot mineralized waters. Now, both of these cities were in the valley of Shava Kiryathaim. Shava Kiryathaim translates to the valley of the double city. Genesis 14:5. And in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims and Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in Shaveh Kiryathaim, which translates to the valley of the double city. Now I'm going to prove that one of those cities is Sodom. Because when we go into Genesis 14:17, it says, and the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Shiva, which is the king's dale. Now, dale means valley. So the valley of Shiva, also known as Shiva Kiryathaim, belonged to the king of Sodom, which means that Sodom, along with another city, was in this valley. That other city would have been Gomorrah. Hence why Sodom and Gomorrah are always mentioned with each other instead of mentioned with the other cities of the plain. Sodom and Gomorrah were in the same valley, and they were the most powerful of the 5 cities. The next one of the cities of the plain is Adma. It's related to the Hebrew word Adam, which means rosy or red. ruddy. Thus, Adma translates to red earth. So when it was named, this was post-destruction of the cities of the plain. And as a result of this destruction, a lot of the land is red. The major tourist attraction people think about when they think about Yellowstone National Park. It has the entire land red because of the amount of iron oxide in the water. This land also contains one of the largest springs known to man. Adma means red earth. This area is full of hot springs, so hot that the only type of life that can be found in them is a type of bacteria that holds on to the iron that the earth produces from the spring and turns it a bright red color. These can be found in several places in Yellowstone, but this area has amongst the largest and hottest springs, and we can find the most red coloration. If we look at the ground of Adma, we can just see all the red land from satellite image. Another one of the cities of the plain is Zeboim. Now, Zeboim is named after not the landscape, but something that can be found in the landscape. Zeboim translates to gazelles, or so you might think. It actually translates into roebuck. The Hebrew word zebi was never translated to mean gazelle anywhere in the scripture. It was always translated to mean roebuck. Strong's Concordance tried to pull a slick one on us because gazelles can be found along the Dead Sea in modern Israel, but not any type of deer like the roebuck. In fact, modern Israel only has the Persian fallow deer, which can only be found in northern Israel, not in the dry areas along the Dead Sea. Zebi translates to a conspicuous, prominent, large, and glorious type of deer. In the Hayden Valley, where Zeboim truly is, it used to have one of the largest moose populations in all Yellowstone, but now that Hayden Valley is surrounded by roads and highways, combined with the 1988 wildfire and an increased elk population that eats all the cottonwood and aspen that the moose naturally feed off of, now most moose can be found in Mammoth Hot Spring, where Sodom and Gomorrah were, and the Lamar Valley several miles southeast of that. Hayden Valley would have supported a huge moose population, as it is much more wooded than Lamar Valley or Mammoth Hot Springs. It just lacks the specific types of trees that moose like to eat, again because of the modern elk population. Hunters went to Hayden Valley and exterminated the gray wolf. As a result, the elk population boomed. Elk and moose compete for the same food. So when the 1988 wildfire hit Hayden Valley, it killed all the types of trees that moose feed from. And when the trees started to grow back, the elk, being more comfortable out in the open and not in the woods, went into the aftermath of the forest fire and ate all the sprouts of the cottonwood and aspen trees that the moose would eat. And as a result, there's not that many cottonwood or aspen trees growing there to this day. So most of the moose migrated northward, but it used to have one of the largest moose populations. Today, Hayden Valley only has a few moose, but this valley has always been known as a hot spot for hoofed animals. In Hayden Valley, you can find bison, elk, mule deer, pronghorns, bighorn rams, and moose. Now, there are several places in Yellowstone that have way more moose than Hayden Valley. However, that's modern times. But what sets this place apart is the fact that we can see Yahuwah's destruction in this area as well. Salty land where no plants can grow. If we look at Zeboim, we can see all of this destroyed land. This was once a city. Now, when we look at the Hebrew root Zebi, if we know through scriptural context that this is a member of the deer family, then why not be a moose, being that the moose is the heaviest, tallest, most conspicuous, and glorious member of the deer family, which can be found in Hayden Valley, in the same region where we see this destroyed land. Now, what's important to understand is because all these Canaanites who dwelt in the cities of the plain were destroyed immediately, the beasts of the field multiplied greatly, like Yahuwah said would happen if he destroys the Canaanites too quickly. When we moved into the land after the Exodus, Yahuwah said he would not destroy the Canaanite too quickly. He would do it little by little, because if he does it too quickly, the beasts of the field will grow in population and overtake the land. Yahuwah didn't want that because that creates an unsafe environment for our children and our wives and our families. So as a result, Yahuwah said he's going to cut off the Canaanite little by little. Because the land is huge, and without that many people, the animals will take over immediately. Because when one species leaves an area, more species have to fill in. That's one of the rules of Mother Nature. Just south of Adma, the last city on the list is Lasha. Now, Lasha is pretty straightforward. Lasha means to break through, and is most likely a boiling spring, according to the scholars. If we look at the land of Lasha, which is actually called the Upper Geyser Basin, Yellowstone National Park in general already has half of the geysers in the world. Actually, 75% of the geysers in the world can be found in Yellowstone National Park. But the Upper Geyser Basin contains the highest concentration of geysers in the world, including famous ones like Old Faithful, Grand Geyser, and Castle Geyser, where the ground is just breaking forth. The fountains of the deep still shoot forth from this region, showing that Sodom and Gomorrah was indeed a volcanic territory. Again, this is another thing we just simply don't see in the Middle East.
According to the account that we see in the book of Jasher, in the region of Sodom, there was an extensive valley that was about a half a day's walk. That would be this valley right here, directly west of all the cities of the plain. As you can see, this valley is well watered as described in the book of Jasher. There is a lake, a river, and there's 2 springs in this region. There's also lots of green growth around the rivers. From one mountain to the other mountain in the valley at its widest point is exactly 15 miles. If we walk about 2.5 miles per hour and we multiply that by 6, we get 15. The whole version of Sodom and Gomorrah just makes no sense in the Middle East. For one, Metzada, Israel, is the area where a lot of people say Sodom and Gomorrah was. But 2 things. For one, it's nowhere near the Jordan River. And for 2, it should be somewhat east of the Jordan River. But instead we have it southwest of the Dead Sea. If he dwelt in all the cities of the Jordan, why is he just randomly south of the Dead Sea and settling there? Also, there's practically no springs in the Jordan River Valley. There's also no 15-mile wide valley in the Jordan River region, unless you're talking about the Jordan River Valley itself, which is still not even 15 miles wide. or even close to that. For context, this is what 15 miles looks like in the Middle East. There's no valley anywhere near the Jordan River that wide. However, we could say maybe it's talking about the length of the valley, and we could say, okay, maybe this is the valley, which is around that length. But this valley was formed because the land was so dry that when the river flowed into this desert, all the sand collapsed, forming a canyon. So how could this be the same valley that's very watered with lots of plants, very fertile? A canyon of this extent would not be able to form in a region with lots of plants in the soil because they provide lots of structure to the ground. This area has pretty much practically always been this dry. So during the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters were to migrate north into Mount Zor, where they were to sleep in a cave. This would be the area of southern Montana's Sheep Mountain, which has about 5 different caves. However, on the way, while leaving Sodom and leaving Gomorrah, Lot's wife disobeyed the angels by turning back to look at the destruction of the city, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. Now, this is what's important. A lot of people don't know that Lot's wife committed adultery on Lot because Lot's wife was a Canaanite of the land. And because Lot's wife was a Canaanite of the land, it was their custom to commit adultery with other men. And as a result, she had other daughters born from other men that were not Lot's daughters. And they were staying in the city and they did not leave the city, and therefore they died. She turned back to mourn for her daughters that she begat out of adultery, and she was therefore punished by getting turned into a pillar of salt. Now here's the true pillar of salt, not that one in the Middle East that's not even made of salt. The true pillar of salt, or Lot's wife, is known as Liberty Cap. Now, Liberty Cap is 37 feet tall. So you might say, how is this Lot's wife? Well, this thing was piled upon layer after layer after layer by all the hot spring precipitation in the region. As you can see in the background, there's many hot springs showering this thing with more and more water. That water contains minerals such as calcium carbonate, which is a type of salt. It's made out of calcium carbonate, a type of salt that is called travertine. It's not the same type of salt that we eat on a daily basis, because if it was that type of salt, it would not be able to stand in the same spot for thousands of years, as described in the book of Wisdom of Solomon. We know that it must be some different type of salt because sodium chloride or table salt would simply dissolve and it would go away after a few months sitting in the same area. But if we want to be technical here, it is also 0.25% sodium chloride, so it does have a little table salt within it. This calcium carbonate was originally bright white, but as it was continually blasted by the hot springs in the region and it gained more and more layers, it absorbed lots of carbon dioxide and iron oxide, changing its color. Before it was this solid concrete that it is today, it was actually soft, chalky calcium carbonate that bison would walk up to and probably even lick, because bison are known to lick different minerals to absorb them into their body.
And that makes sense because if you have this 2,200 pound tank that runs around on the rocks and hills, it's gonna need some strong bones to support its weight. In case you don't know, the common name for calcium carbonate is simply chalk. And when chalk is in its natural state, it's actually edible for all mammals because it provides highly absorbable calcium to the bloodstream, which actually makes it very beneficial for the bones. Bison are known, as well as elk, moose, and every other hoofed animal, are known to travel to these natural travertine sources and lick up the chalk from the earth.
In fact, if you have osteoporosis and you go to the doctor, he might simply prescribe you some calcium carbonate pills if he's a good doctor. Calcium carbonate is an actual salt that builds bones, and bison love to lick it.
This is called mineral licking and something very common in all hoofed animals.
Now, they say that this Liberty Cap, as it is called, the Liberty Cap stone, is 37 feet tall. It was smaller, but it gained layer upon layer upon layer. They say that this was simply a geyser that stopped blasting, but the problem with that is there's no hole on the top. I've seen the top of it from Google Maps, and it's a solid top. There's no hole at the top. If this was a geyser at one point, there would be a hole at the top, but there's no hole at the top. It's simply formed by mineral precipitation from the springs around it. Simply springs flowing water to the bottom of it will cause steam to rise to the top. And as steam rises to the top, calcium carbonate precipitates out of that spring, causing it to grow in height and width. But there had to have been something solid at the base of it at one point, allowing this stuff to grow upon it.
But when Lot's wife turned around, what took place was this hot spring erupted basically right next to her, covering her with highly mineralized water containing calcium carbonate at an extreme concentration, basically locking her in place and solidifying around her so thick that she would not have been able to break free.
Jasher 19 and 53. And when she looked back, she became a pillar of salt, and is yet in the same place unto this day. And the oxen which stood on that place daily licked up the salt to the extremities of their feet. And in the morning it would spring forth afresh, and they licked it up unto this day. Now we have to understand something here. When we look at that thing that they say is the pillar of salt, Lot's wife in the Middle East, for one, that thing is 65 feet tall. There's nothing to make it grow that big. There's no springs in the area that's going to make it grow that big. And for two, it's on the top of a mountain where oxen are not going to climb to lick. It's not made of salt of any kind. So what are we really talking about here with that? That's all speculation. What we have over here in America is something that's also tall. However, there is something to feed it. Notice it said after the bison licked the salt, more salt will come back afterwards. That's not through any type of miracle or anything like that. That's simply because it's being fed by mineral precipitation. The springs are showering more mist upon it, and more salt simply grows upon the pillar. Now, Lot's wife was not the only person who got cemented shut in this calcium carbonate pillar. If we go a little bit northeast of Zeboim, in another destroyed region, which would have been a small town on the outskirts of the cities of the plain, there's this area called Fairyland. In Fairyland, near the Broad Creek, we find more pillars of salt. And guess what, guys? Travertine cones like this can be found nowhere else on Earth. As you can see, it even appears that they have heads. See how they just surround the river? If fire and brimstone is falling down upon you, this liquid sulfur is like frying grease hitting your skin. Your first instinct is going to be to run to the river. As soon as they ran to the river, the springs opened up, cemented them shut with this calcium carbonate salt, and they stayed in that position to this day. Now, if you were to open up these pillars of salt, you're not going to find human bodies in there, because these things were continually fed with more and more moisture
and therefore their bodies would have decomposed relatively quickly. Therefore, nowadays, these things are basically pure minerals, but once upon a time, there were people under them. Some of them have been weathered away to the point where they're really short. Others still stand tall. Now, I already know people are gonna say, Ayob, what about the Tel Al Hammam cosmic airburst event that the researchers are now coming out to say a heat event destroyed an entire ancient city, melting the pottery, killing people, and just destroying the city? Isn't that proof that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah that was described in the scriptures actually happened in the Middle East? And this is what I would say to that question. Although this is very intriguing, because this actually supposedly took place in an area that matches the biblical description a lot more than the Masada region. It's actually east of the Jordan River, which makes a lot more sense because scripture says that Lot traveled east. However, it shouldn't be towards the south of the Jordan River. It should technically be towards the north of the Jordan River. Because again, if you're going from Bethel and you're going east to the Jordan River, you're going to end up being at the southern end of the Jordan River. In order to dwell in all the cities of the plain, that means you would have to go from the southern part of the Jordan River, make your way up to the northern part of the Jordan River, then dwell in Sodom, which would make Sodom somewhere north of the Jordan River. Of course, however, this still makes a lot more sense than the Masada region. So we do have evidence. I wouldn't say I believe it 100% because we know that the archaeological excavations of modern Israel were basically founded by the Rothschilds. They were the ones who funded the very first archaeological digs, and they still put money in those digs to this day because they want to push out this narrative that that is indeed the true land of Israel. A lot of those archaeological sites are just bull, all right? They're just fake, and they were made by the Masons. They're called Masons for a reason because these are brick workers with stone, guys. These people create these false cities and this false history on purpose to deceive the masses. Now, anyway, let's just say that this is real, guys. A cosmic airburst is when a meteor is about to hit the earth, but instead it explodes in the atmosphere, but the heat still destroys any ground that's underneath it, killing anybody who's there, destroying any plants that's there, any animals that's there, etc. However, let me just say this. After 1901, 59 cosmic airbursts were recorded on Earth. That's only after 1901. So imagine how many happened throughout human history. You know, so it wouldn't be that much of a coincidence if it happened in the Middle East at some point in time, guys. So let's just be real. You know, it had to have happened in the Middle East at some point of time. So you can't just say, oh, that's Sodom and Gomorrah, because get this. This event only affected one city. One city they found was affected by this event. Well, technically two if you include Jericho, or the Jericho that they tell us is Jericho. But the scriptures never mention Jericho even being involved in the destruction of the cities of the plain. But where are the other four cities? If this is Sodom, where are the other four cities at? They just don't exist in the Middle East, guys. You just have this one area that was destroyed by some type of heat event, but you don't have any other cities. You don't have any smoking land. You don't have any extensive regions of salt. You don't have any pillars of salt. You don't have any areas where the ground is breaking forth into geysers. You don't have any red land. You don't have any roebucks and wild beasts roaming the land, guys. You don't have these things. So how can we say this is Sodom? You just don't have it. We don't have the heaps, the random heaps in this region. So how can you say this is the land of Sodom and Gomorrah? just because a heat event killed people and it's east of the Dead Sea and east of the Jordan River, that automatically means that this is actually Sodom and Gomorrah? No. A cosmic airburst is just heat. Most certainly no brimstone. Nothing is actually falling from the sky. It's literally just heat hitting an area beneath and wiping things out that are living. How could this be the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? Again, brimstone or sulfur only comes from volcanoes. It is not from an asteroid. It is not from any type of meteor. It only develops within the vents of volcanoes. Period. That's where it comes from. So anything that's talking about brimstone automatically is volcanic. Did you know on the outskirts of Yellowstone you can still see trees from Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction? Yellowstone's petrified tree forest and overview. Yellowstone's petrified tree forest formed primarily because of volcanic activity in the region. Okay, now I want you to take a closer look at these trees. What killed these trees? What caused these trees to be petrified? Well, if you look at this petrified tree right here, this is one of the tallest petrified trees still standing, and it's made of pure stone because the wood got replaced with silica. I want you to see the imprints on the wood that was left before it was turned into silica. Once we zoomed in, we can see all these black dots, black spots, you know what I'm saying, and black dripping. What is that? That is liquefied and solidified sulfur from volcanic eruption. As this volcano erupted, it sprayed sulfur. When scripture said it rained sulfur, it literally was raining. It was liquid. It was raining from the sky. It wasn't rocks falling. It was literally liquid falling from the sky. Sulfur liquid falling from the sky. We still see that on this petrified wood. If you look at other petrified trees, you don't see this. But when you go into this region of Yellowstone, you see it. And it's facing inward towards Yellowstone. Okay, so it's facing inward towards the caldera. We can tell it's coming directly from the volcanic vent. If we go to the other side of the tree, we don't see this pattern anymore. It's only on one side of the tree. This whole thing, this whole area is one volcano. That's one volcano. You know where the hole of the volcano is? The blowhole, the vent? You know where that's at? Guess. This lake called Yellowstone Lake is all one big hole. That's the whole of the volcano, guys. Underneath this lake, there's like 3 craters, which fire and brimstone would have erupted from. Now, but when the volcano erupted, it wasn't just from this hole. Man, there's hundreds, if not thousands of other vents that all erupted at the same time, guys. I'm telling you, this was a very wild event. And guys, did you know what kind of tree this is? You would never guess what type of tree this is. They say it's millions of years old and stuff, of course. They'll say that this is millions, they have to kind of like mess with your mind. But you can clearly look at this and tell it's not millions of years old, right? You have a brain, right? You can see that, right? Okay, anyway. They were able to see the cells of it. They were able to slice thin pieces of its cells, look at it under a microscope, and determine that it's a redwood tree. Yeah, the same redwoods that grow in California. You ask yourself, wait, redwoods only grow in coastal Mediterranean environments. How did a redwood once grow in Wyoming? Well, that's because Wyoming used to have a very humid Mediterranean warm climate. The only reason why it's so cold today is because of human sin. The cold is not normal for the earth. Snow and blizzards is not normal for the earth. Earth was supposed to be warm, okay? The reason why it's cold is because of all the volcanic eruptions that has happened throughout human history. And volcanic eruptions are Yah's judgment on certain people at certain times. The first thing that cooled the earth after the flood was the Tower of Babel getting destroyed. Remember, it says in the book of Jasher that fire rained down from heaven, destroyed the tower. That's an asteroid. When an asteroid strike that tower, that put so much debris in the atmosphere, thickened the atmosphere, causing some of the first winters. That's why humans had to get out of that region. Canada became very cold. Mankind spread very abruptly. Yeah, the languages changed and stuff, but another factor is climate. People had to get out of the cold. Now, another thing that took place was the Sodom and Gomorrah eruption. That eruption also cooled the earth. And, you know, all the other eruptions that happen around the earth, every single volcanic eruption cools the earth by a fraction of a degree. Okay, and all that stuff adds up and it gets colder and colder and colder. Okay, the earth's default state is warm. There used to be palm trees in Alaska. This is a fact. Look it up. There used to be palm trees in Alaska. There used to be palm trees all over the world. The whole world was tropical. This is a proven fact. That's why you don't see the redwood trees growing in Wyoming anymore. It's too cold for that. But the point I just want to talk about is, yeah, you can see the sulfur inside the wood. Like I told you, it's not going to be balls of sulfur. It's going to be just drips. Now, these trees can only be found on the outskirts of Yellowstone. They can't be found within Yellowstone, like actually next to the vents. No, you're not finding them because that region was so destroyed and ripped apart to where nothing remains. No buildings, no trees, nothing from that time period remains. It was all, a lot of stuff was sunken into the ground, pushed back up, sunken, melted, and exploded, thrown apart. It was an extreme event that took place, guys. An extreme event. Parts of the ground collapsed. Entire, villages sunk into the earth. And in other places, entire villages thrown out of the earth. I'm talking about miles out of the ground. People getting thrown up to 20 miles in the air. Yellowstone volcano, strongest volcano on the earth. Okay, and it erupted before. So on the outskirts, the trees, we still have little pieces of the trees. See how the top half is missing? In an instant, 1 second, the whole top half flew off of this tree because of the eruption. And this was miles away from the volcano. So imagine stuff that happened close up to the volcanoes. You understand what I'm telling you? Man, people be like, why are there no buildings here if this is Sodom and Gomorrah? Why are there no buildings? When Yah destroys a place, he completely destroys it. He doesn't half-ass destroy a place. He'll turn the land into a desolation, meaning it's going to be empty. You understand? So every time he destroys a place, he says that. So with that being said, why do you expect to find buildings in Sodom? But on the outskirts of Sodom, behind the mountains that was shielded, in areas that was shielded, I can show you some stuff. Here's a megalithic building that, you can still see the stones flowing off into the wind. This is no joke, guys. You can still see, the wind come this way. Stones flowing off the wind. You see the rooms in this thing? This building is huge, by the way. One stone is 12 foot long. So you guys think this eruption was a game, and it was not. Now you see all these fallen trees? You gotta ask yourself, why these trees fell down? Because every time a tree grows in this region, it dies. The tree grows and it just dies because when it gets to a certain point, the acidity in soil is just too much.